So, as I was preparing today, the best line that I read was that Ukraine continues to add sanctions to Russia through drone strikes. We'll talk about that in just a moment. Let's start here with the casualties. It is Saturday, January 18th, 2025. 1340 Russians off the battlefield today. What does that mean? Let's look at this. 1340 is not very high. Let's just do a little control find and put 13 in here and see there's 14 instances of it, and of course I have to subtract 3 because 13, 13, and 13 for the days of the month. So there's 11 instances of 1300 some odd casualties, 9 instances of 14 some odd casualties, 1400 some odd. There are Oh, now when we get to 15, there's going to be 18 or 19 instances of 1,500 some odd casualties. When we look at 16, we see about the same thing, somewhere around 18 instances over the last 3 months. Okay. And then we get to 17, it drops down to about 10. And when we get to 18, it drops down to about 3. And when we get to 19, there's not a lot either. 19, there's only about 3 of those as well. Okay, so that's where we are. 13 is not out of range, but it's on the low end, and there's not a whole lot of those over the course of the last few months. 1,340 Russians off the battlefield, 13 armored fighting vehicles, 21 artillery systems, 69 vehicles and fuel tanks. Okay, Andrew Perpetua's list, this is what he could identify for the 11th. He's still playing catch up. It's about 1-to-1. And then if we look at the next day or actually the 12th wasn't there, the 13th was though. And you see, again, it's a lot more, but it's still about 1-to-1. And he's playing catch up. He said this, backlog will be finished today. I don't envy this guy his job. I would not be trying to fight him for it. I can guarantee you that. The Ukrainian Air Force reported a missile and drone attack overnight and yesterday. 2 out of 4 Iskander ballistic missiles were shot down, 38 out of 39 Shahed drones. But the ballistic missiles do a lot of damage, right? And it hit in Kyiv this morning. Russia has again hit Kyiv center with ballistic missiles. Now, Sergei Sumaleny is in Germany, and he talks about how a lot about from a German point of view. This happened after Chancellor Scholz has said that Ukraine does not need any additional air defense. Now, we're going to come back to that story because something really big happened with that. But yeah, it was pretty devastating in Kyiv. There's some dead and wounded, as it's really hard to stop ballistic missiles. Okay, now here is what Ukraine has been doing to Russia. 4 oil depots are burning simultaneously in Russia. The fires at oil depots at Engels, Saratov region, Lisky, and Voronezh region are still not extinguished. And then you add on top of that what's happened those days before. During the night, oil depots in Kaluga and Tula regions were also attacked and are still burning. So Russia targets shops, hospitals, residential buildings. Now, again, this isn't all that Russia targets. They do target military on the front line and that sort of thing. But overnight, what they tend to do is target civilian and infrastructure that's like hurting civilians, like the electrical grid. Ukraine destroys military infrastructure and logistics. So, yeah, they're not really interested in hitting a shop or hospital or a apartment flat. That's not what they're after. Okay, Ukraine continues. This is the best line from the night. Came from Spravdy. Ukraine continues to inflict severe sanctions on Russia's already collapsing petroleum industry. So here are views of Voronezh and Engels and what the fires were like. Great line. I mean, that's what they're doing. They're doing it. They're forcefully adding those sanctions. It's not economic. Here are some unverified photos of posted on social media showing firefighting vehicles speeding off in the direction of a large blaze at what they said was an oil storage depot in Ludenivo. I hope I pronounced that correctly. General Staff confirms that Ukrainian Special Operations Forces struck a Rosneft fuel depot in Kaluga Oblast. Now, this facility serves as a logistics hub for Russian forces. So that was a good hit. So this was in Kaluga. There's a few more pictures of Kaluga, I think. Ukrainian drone successfully attacked Russia's oil refinery in Kaluga. Here's another picture. And here's a little bit more. Notice that there's no, now, this was really interesting. I'm not going to show the video itself, but there's no outgoing anti-aircraft fire. I mean, they just waltzed right in and hit it. So Ukraine's really not going to stop. They're going to continue to destroy Russia's oil industry, and there's nothing that Putin can do about it. And again, Russia is so large that they can't shoot everything down. Okay, they just can't defend everything. Dedelivo station in the Tula region of Russia. This is what it looks like. It's on fire, and this is the size, the scope of this oil depot. So, okay. 500 kilometers from the border. So Russian authorities insist now about that Tula hit that it was successfully repelled. I mean, they're coming out and saying that, which would lead you to ask, well, why is there this towering inferno in Tula? Because that fire seems to disagree with what the Russian authorities are saying, but there's nothing to see here. Okay, let's shift gears a little bit. Russia is likely to prioritize addressing its manpower issues through defense agreements with North Korea, as Iran is unlikely to provide military personnel to support Russia's war in Ukraine. And Russia has been leveraging its military technological ties with Iran since 2022 without a strategic partnership agreement. So, yesterday I was talking about the strategic partnership agreement that came out of, that they finally signed. It is not the kind of defense pact that the Russians created with North Korea and Belarus. They didn't do that, but they do have some pretty not delightful clauses about like sharing nuclear capabilities and things along those lines. But it doesn't look like Iran is going to sign up for some kind of pact in that kind of sense. Now, so the Russians are still going to get troops from North Korea, and they're bribing their own people. So since the new year, Russia has increased one-time payments to new soldiers to 4 million rubles. That's $38,000. Now, Jay in Kyiv was saying it now costs the Russian government what the average Russian earns in 10 years to lure them into the army. And I said, well, that seems like it's pretty high. So what's the average wage? Well, average yearly salary in Russia sits around 1.24 million rubles, roughly 14,000. The lowest average is just 26,200, and the high is about 463,000 rubles. So yeah, I'm not exactly sure how they're calculating this, but if you're just looking at the low and the high subtracted by or divided by the with the 1.24 million, then you'd be at like 2 times or up to 47 times. Like this is just rough cutting, but I think Jay's right. Like they're really buying them off because it costs them a lot to get these people to come, and they're drawing people from the poorest regions more than not. And so it looks like a good deal until you get there, I would imagine. Now let's talk about getting there in the Pokrovsk direction. And I'm only going to talk about Pokrovsk right now. Again, 64 attacks a day. It was 40-something yesterday, 60-something the day before, and 60-something the day before that, if my memory serves correctly. So it's still hot at the front. And yesterday I talked about what was going on in Pokrovsk. And if you missed that video, please go back one day and see what is really transpiring on the battlefield of the front line all the way around. Okay. Other news, French and Danish shipyards are servicing Russian ice-class LNG tankers, enabling the export of Arctic gas despite sanctions. Why are they doing that? Well, I mean they can. They're not as far as I understand, there's no sanction preventing them from servicing these vessels, but you realize what you're doing by servicing them, right? These shipyards maintain tankers crucial for transporting gas from Russia's Yamal LNG plant, especially during peak winter demand. So they're still doing it. Today, a Russian court sent 3 of Alexei Navalny's lawyers to prison for up to 5.5 years. 5.5 years. The trial has been held behind closed doors, but journalists were allowed to see the verdict. So they weren't allowed to see the trial, but they're allowed to see the verdict. Darth Putin quipped about this. We'll give all dissidents 24/7 access to their lawyers by putting them in jail too. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of how they roll. Now, this man's also a dissident, and he's being sent away. And this is his final speech. Gary Kasparov posted this, posting in a full new translation of the last word speech at the court of historian Alexander Skobov at his trial this week, who will most likely perish in Putin's gulag. This is the voice of a true Russian patriot, and I'm honored that the man of such immense courage is a member of the Free Russia Forum. It's worth noting that Alexander was jailed as a young man back in Soviet days for his dissident views, arrest by communists, now by fascists, a true demonstration of his immense courage and unshakable principles. Okay, so what did he say in court? Like this was his your final thing that you get to say. Okay, he said this. I was raised in the Soviet Union with the conviction that when an evil aggressor attacks peaceful citizens, one must take up arms and fight. And if you cannot hold a weapon yourself, you must help those who can and encourage others to do so. All my public activity is a call to fight the aggressor who attacked Ukraine, to support Ukraine with weapons and ammunition. I consider myself a patriot in the armed resistance against the aggressor. In the missiles and shells that destroy the invaders, there's a small part of me. And I share a small part in every eliminated occupier. No one attacked Russia. No one threatened it. That's right. It's not like Ukraine was on the border going before 2014, which was the first invasion. And even in 2022, it was not like Russia or Ukraine was going to go, you know what, we're coming across the border and we're coming to get you. Like that wasn't happening. No one attacked Russia. No one threatened it. It is Putin's Nazi regime that attacked Ukraine, driven solely by its leaders' delusions of grandeur and their inhuman lust for power over everyone around them. They affirmed themselves by killing hundreds of thousands of people. They are degenerates, scum, Nazi filth. The guilt of Putin's Nazi dictatorship in preparing, unleashing, and waging an aggressive war is obvious and needs no proof. Likewise, our right to armed resistance against the aggressor on the battlefield and on the aggressor's territory needs no justification. Indeed, it would be laughable to expect such acknowledgments from a regime that imprisons people merely for uttering a word of moral condemnation against it. Like that's what you're going to prison for, not for actually doing something, but for talking. Yeah. All possibilities for legal protest against Putin's aggression have long been eradicated. My call for armed resistance today against the aggressor's regime are considered by it to be a T activity. Now, I do recognize the irony of me not saying that word to stay within Google, or I guess it's Google that owns YouTube's parameters and not have problems with them, given this context. But wow. Okay, I will not argue with the aggressor's authorities, even if they decide to charge me with pedophilia. The judicial system in Russia, by the way, this is their chart. They charge people with things, even if there's no real sound basis for that. The judicial system in Russia has long proven itself to be an appendage of Nazi tyranny, and seeking justice there is meaninglessness. Or seeking justice there is meaningless. Excuse me. I will never bow before these people, accomplices to murders and scoundrels. I have nothing to argue about with them. Let the cannons speak for me. I see no point in arguing with the dictatorship's marionettes about how faithfully they apply their laws. These are, in any case, the laws of a totalitarian state aimed at trampling dissent. That's exactly right. It's not communist in ideology anymore, but it is totalitarian increasingly. It's authoritarian at least, right? But it's becoming more and more totalitarianism. Okay, I do not recognize these laws and I will not succumb to them. I also will not appeal any decisions or actions of the representatives of this Nazi regime. I do not seek mercy from my armed enemy. The Putin dictatorship may kill me, but it cannot force me to abandon my fight against it. Wherever I may be, I will continue to call on honest Russians to join the armed forces of Ukraine. I will continue to advocate for strikes on military targets deep within Russian territory. I will call on the civilized world to inflict a strategic defeat on Nazi Russia. I will argue for the necessity of military destruction of the new Hitler regime. Putin is the new Hitler. intoxicated by impunity. And I think there's something very true about how he's growing with every time there's impunity for him doing something that the world should be crying out about, he becomes more and more intoxicated by it. A ghoul drunk on blood. And I will not tire of repeating, crush the serpent. Death to Putin, murderer, tyrant, and scoundrel, he says. Death to the Russian fascist invaders, glory to Ukraine. That's how he ended his speech when he had his last word. Wow. Okay, just a little bit more here. Let's turn a corner and talk about a different episode here. German Foreign Minister Baerbock left the government meeting, refusing to be photographed with Chancellor Olaf Scholz after his decision to block the allocation of a new aid package for Ukraine. So, Anton Gerashenko posted this, as well did a number of other people. Jane Kyiv mentioned the photo that should haunt the pathetic weakling Scholz until his dying days. Okay, I think this photo is actually going to be the same kind of photo that, the Hillary Clinton, what difference at this point does it make, talking about Benghazi, which really kind of gave her a black eye, or the George Bush, I'm going to both Republican and Democrat here, I'm not just being partisan, when he was talking about, well, that's amazing, what's his barcode scanner do, right? Those kind of moments got captured, and they really hurt these politicians. Just a few more things. I'll try to end on a happier note here. Men be like, where's the ketchup? But then those same men are also like, sniper in that building, 400 yards past those trees. There is something to that. I can never find the ketchup. Okay, on this day in 2022, the Russian embassy in Jakarta reminded us that suggestions that Russia would invade Ukraine were fakes spread by the United States. Seeing as we didn't invade, you can believe our promises now about stopping the invasion. Okay, here's the actual tweet. Russian embassy in Indonesia, Jakarta, Indonesia. Foreign Minister Lavrov says that U.S. officials have disseminated a batch of total disinformation about Russia's allegedly preparing a provocation in order to justify the so-called invasion of Ukraine. That was January 17th, 2022. All right, last little bit. Happy Saturday. It's Saturday today. Today's mission, keep morale high and stand with Ukraine. 3rd Tank Brigade. That cat looks like it's definitely an outdoor cat who has lived a hard life. All right, my friends, that's all that I have for today. Thank you for the shares, the likes, the subscribes. Thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.